The whispered stories begin. The stars have always held secrets, but few are whispered as much as the tale of the day humanity stopped pretending. It is a story shared in hushed tones across the Galactic Council halls, around the dimly lit campfires of war-weary soldiers, and in the shadowed corners of trader stations, where those who remember dare not speak too loudly. Tonight, on the luminous world of Proxima Prime, under the twin moons that bathe its sprawling citadel in silver light, a group of young Proxim learners gathers around a seasoned elder, Ambassador Krill. His chitinous hands rest on the hover podium, his elongated eyes reflecting the flickering holograms that illuminate the story he is about to tell. They have all heard fragments of the legend before. They have seen the old data feeds, the shaky, barely censored recordings that depict what the Galactic Council calls the Reckoning. But never before have they heard it from one who was there. One who stood on the precipice of history, watching as humanity's patience, so long mistaken for weakness, turned into something far more terrifying. Ambassador Krill's mandibles clicked thoughtfully before he spoke. His voice, usually composed, carried a reverence tonight. "Oh, by the sacred moons, you want to know about the humans." He paused for effect, letting the weight of the words settle into the younglings' minds. "You want to know about the day they stopped pretending." A murmur rippled through the gathering. Some students shifted uncomfortably. Others leaned in, their bioluminescent skin dimming in anticipation. Krill inhaled slowly, his mind drifting back across 15 cycles, back to the moment when everything changed. The galaxy before the storm. For most of its existence, the galaxy had seen humans as an anomaly, a Deathworld species that, despite its violent evolutionary history, chose to be kind, chose to compromise. The Galactic Council, an alliance of the most dominant species in known space, had observed humanity for centuries, perplexed by their contradictory nature. They had expected war when Earth was discovered. Instead, they found a people who sought cooperation, who offered trade agreements instead of weapons, alliances instead of conquests. Humans were unpredictable in their affections. They could form bonds with creatures of vastly different biologies, forging connections that defied logic. They called it empathy. The Council called it a tactical weakness. For a time, humanity's soft diplomacy worked. They brokered peace in interstellar conflicts, shared their advanced medical technologies, and even intervened in planetary famines. They were respected, even admired. But admiration is not the same as fear. And when you are not feared in the great expanse of space, you are eventually seen as prey. The betrayal. The first betrayal did not come as an invasion or an act of war. No, it came in the form of deception, a slow and patient erosion of trust. The Vorkari Dominion, one of the more ruthless members of the Council, had always harbored ambitions of expansion. Humanity, ever the optimists, believed in diplomacy even when the cracks began to show. The Vorkari requested assistance. A supposed humanitarian crisis on one of their border colonies, Choctaw 7. Millions of lives at risk, their atmospheric regulators failing, their crops dying. Earth, ever willing to help, responded. They sent supply fleets, medical teams, and diplomatic envoys to oversee the relief effort. They offered aid freely, asking nothing in return, but the assurance that peace would be maintained. Then, when humanity's fleets were stretched thin, when their best minds were deployed across distant systems, the Vorkari struck. The distress call from Outpost Helios 3 came first. A small human research station along the frontier, wiped out overnight by what the Vorkari claimed was a pirate incursion. Then came the blockade around Luna 2, Earth's primary off-world colony, cutting off vital resources. The final blow was delivered to Mars, where a series of coordinated cyberattacks crippled entire sectors of infrastructure, leaving millions in chaos. The Council did nothing, not because they were powerless, but because they had expected this outcome. They had allowed it. And for the first time, humanity realized something horrifying. They had never been seen as equals. The silence before the storm. The humans did not respond immediately. That was what unnerved the council the most. There were no desperate pleas for intervention, no hurried diplomatic protests, no grand speeches about justice. Instead, humanity simply stopped talking. They withdrew their envoys, pulled their traders from council-controlled space, and left their embassies empty. The galactic markets trembled. Earth was not the most advanced civilization, nor the most powerful. But they were innovators, problem solvers. Their technology, their cunning, had been the backbone of countless industries. And now, with silent precision, they severed those ties. Worlds that relied on human-built infrastructure felt the first tremors of collapse. Supply chains faltered. Economies wavered. And still, Earth said nothing. Then came the disappearances. Vorkari military stations along the border reported missing patrol ships. No distress calls, no debris, just gone. A council frigate, the Solstice Dawn, vanished while en route to a diplomatic meeting near human space. Days later, a Vorkari warlord's personal cruiser was found adrift, its crew missing, its engines dismantled with eerie precision. Fear began to spread. Whispers turned into rumors. Had humanity retaliated? Had they finally abandoned their diplomacy? For the first time in recorded history, the Galactic Council held an emergency summit, not to discuss an external threat, but to debate what humanity might be planning. It was already too late. The day humanity stopped pretending. Ambassador Krill's voice grew solemn as he reached the part of the tale that would forever be etched in history. The council convened on Elder's Spire, a neutral station in deep space, to discuss their response. They thought humanity would come to the table, plead for reconciliation. The young Proxim listened in rapt silence. They did not come to negotiate. The station's long-range scanners detected movement first, a fleet emerging from subspace, larger than anything the Council had ever seen. Human warships, silent and waiting, hundreds of them. They did not broadcast threats. They did not open fire. Instead, one message was transmitted across every Council communication channel, a voice that sent a chill through every species present. A single sentence: "We are done being nice." The Proxim students shivered, their bioluminescent patterns flickering anxiously. They knew what came next. This was the day the galaxy stopped seeing humanity as diplomats and started seeing them as a force to be feared. The breaking point. The galaxy holds its breath. The moment the transmission ended, silence gripped Elder's Spire, a silence so vast it felt like space itself had swallowed the galaxy whole. The council chamber, a grand hall of polished obsidian and luminescent glyphs, was filled with representatives of 100 species. All of them now stared at the holographic display where, just seconds ago, humanity's message had been broadcast. "We are done being nice." The words lingered, more chilling than any war declaration, more final than any formal act of aggression. For the first time in recorded history, the Galactic Council did not know what to do. There was no precedent for this. The humans, so long the peacekeepers, the negotiators, the problem solvers, had just announced their patience was gone. And that terrified everyone. The Council's fractured response. Ambassador Vrix of the Vorkari Dominion was the first to break the silence. "This is nothing but a bluff," he declared, his scales flaring an anxious shade of orange. "Humans rely on alliances, on goodwill. They wouldn't dare start a war." But High Chancellor Orvine of the Athraxi hegemony turned his piercing, multi-lensed gaze toward the Vorkari ambassador. His species had warred with humans before, in the Draconis conflict, centuries ago. They had learned a truth that the Council had willfully ignored. "They do not bluff," Orvine said, his voice resonating like a low-frequency hum. "If they say they are done being nice, then they are already at war, whether we acknowledge it or not." A murmur of unease rippled through the chamber. "What do we do?" asked Minister Raylon of the Threx Coalition, his gills fluttering in distress. "Should we attempt peace?" Ambassador Joelcor of the Proxim clicked his mandibles. Peace was what we had before. We squandered it. Now, we have uncertainty. The discussion quickly devolved into frantic shouting. Some demanded immediate action, a preemptive strike before humanity could move. Others advocated for containment, isolating human-controlled space. A few even suggested appeasement, sending emissaries to beg for forgiveness. But no matter what course they debated, the unspoken truth hung over them like a phantom. It wasn't their decision anymore. Humanity had already made their choice. Humanity's silent mobilization. While the Council panicked, Earth prepared. There were no grand military parades, no public war declarations, only a quiet, methodical mobilization. Every off-world human colony shifted its focus overnight. Shipyards that had once built commercial freighters now churned out warships. Mining operations in the Kuiper Belt quadrupled their output, feeding the orbital forges that assembled dreadnoughts unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. And in the shadows, special operations teams moved without a trace. Across Council-controlled space, key supply routes collapsed overnight. Energy conduits were mysteriously sabotaged. Entire Vorkari supply depots disappeared without explanation. The media called it the Phantom War, because no one ever saw the attacks coming. But humanity did not claim responsibility. They didn't have to. The message was already clear. You took from us. Now, we take everything from you. The first strike, and the lesson that followed. After weeks of uneasy waiting, the Vorkari Dominion decided to act. Believing humanity was still weakened from their earlier betrayals, they sent a fleet of 60 warships toward the Sol system. The goal was simple: blockade Earth, force the humans to negotiate from a position of desperation. They never reached their destination. In the cold void between Jupiter and Saturn, the Vorkari fleet vanished. Not a single distress call, not a single escape pod. When the Galactic Council dispatched a probe to investigate, they found the remnants of the Vorkari fleet, torn apart with surgical precision. Engines destroyed, weapons systems disabled, crews missing. But the most chilling discovery was what was left behind. A single human beacon, broadcasting on all frequencies. It simply repeated one phrase: "We suggest you reconsider." The footage was shown across the galaxy, sending a wave of panic through every species. The Council scrambled to make sense of it. But deep down, they already knew. Humanity was not launching a war in the traditional sense. They were teaching a lesson. The Great Retreat begins. Within a month, Vorkari forces pulled out of all human claimed sectors. Within 2, the first Council worlds began quietly removing sanctions against humanity, desperate to distance themselves from the brewing storm. Within 3, entire species reconsidered their allegiances. The Proxim, once passive members of the Council, began secretly opening diplomatic talks with Earth. The Ithraxi hegemony, despite its long history of distrust with humanity, withdrew all its forces from disputed territories. Even the Threx coalition, known for its arrogance, issued an official statement declaring a desire for revaluation of human relations. The message was clear. No one wanted to be next. A reckoning delayed, not denied. For all the fear, all the whispered terror that now surrounded humanity, there was still one question unanswered. What did the humans want? They had the power to wage war, to burn entire empires to the ground. But they hadn't. They had given the galaxy a chance to back away, to reflect on the mistakes that had led them here. The Vorkari had learned their lesson too late. Would the rest of the galaxy learn in time? Or was this only the beginning? Back on Proxima Prime, Ambassador Krill let the silence settle over the young Proxim students, his eyes reflecting the solemn gravity of the tale. "You see," he said softly, "humanity had always been capable of destruction, but they chose restraint. They chose peace, even when they could have taken everything by force." The younglings listened, their bioluminescent globe pulsing in thought. "But what happens?" Krill asked, his mandibles clicking in quiet concern. when the galaxy forgets that lesson again. The room was silent, because deep down, everyone knew the truth. This was not the end of the story. It was only a warning, a galactic wake-up call. The fractured galaxy stands on edge. The Galactic Council had seen wars before. It had witnessed empires rise and crumble, watched civilizations consume themselves in greed, and observed the inevitable cycles of history repeat. But never had it encountered a war like this, a war that never truly began, yet never seemed to end. Humanity's retaliation had been neither loud nor chaotic. There were no declarations of conquest, no planets raised, no fleets marching toward dominance. Instead, there was silence, a crushing, calculated silence. Humanity did not launch invasions. They did not broadcast ultimatums. They simply acted. And that was what made it terrifying. The Phantom War escalates. The Vorkari Dominion was the first to crumble. Their once booming economy had relied on human-engineered infrastructure, from energy grids to logistical eye. The moment humanity withdrew its support, those systems collapsed like hollow bones, and the Vorkari supply chains fractured overnight. Fleets meant for conquest found themselves stranded, their fuel reserves depleted due to unexpected distribution failures. Entire Vorkari colonies, once thriving, turned into ghost worlds, cut off from essential trade routes they had taken for granted. And yet, not a single human fleet was ever seen near their space. The message was clear. You never needed our mercy, did you? Let's see how you survive without it. The rest of the galaxy watched in horror. Because if the humans could collapse an empire without firing a shot, what could they do when they truly wanted war? A message from the abyss. It was in the third cycle of what historians would later call the Great Reckoning that the Ithraxi hegemony made a bold and foolish move. Their rulers believed humanity was stretched too thin, that their passive aggression was simply a bluff to mask the fact that they lacked true military dominance. The Ithraxi, proud warriors and seasoned tacticians, launched a covert fleet toward a human outpost on the rim of Sol-controlled space. The mission was simple: test human defenses, engage in rapid, overwhelming strikes, retreat before retribution could follow. It was meant to be surgical, precise, an intimidation tactic meant to show that humans could still bleed. That fleet was never heard from again. At first, the Council assumed the humans had obliterated them in open combat, a massacre, perhaps, or an overwhelming show of force. But when Ithraxi recon teams finally located the missing fleet, they did not find wreckage. They did not find debris. They found the ships intact, dead in the void. Every vessel had been disabled, powered down with eerie precision, weapons unresponsive, engines cold, life support systems intact. But the crews, they were gone. No signs of struggle, no signs of battle, no escape pods jettisoned, just empty ships, adrift in the black, whispering warnings to anyone who dared to listen. A single data packet was left behind in the flagship's encrypted core. When decrypted, it contained only one line: "You should not have tested us." The Ithraxi hegemony pulled out of all human-adjacent territories within a standard week. They never spoke of the incident again. The silent collapse of an empire. By the fourth cycle, the Galactic Council itself was beginning to break under the pressure. The Vorkari were in economic ruin. The Ithraxi had retreated into paranoid silence. The Proxim, once known for their neutrality, were secretly reaching up to Earth to establish deeper alliances. But the real breaking point came when the Threx Coalition, one of the oldest and most powerful members of the Council, suffered a sudden, inexplicable military failure. The Threx had prided themselves on their defensive fleets, an impenetrable web of automated stations and warships that no known species had ever breached. But one morning, without warning, their entire Sector 7 defense grid went offline. Satellites ceased function. Spaceports lost control of their docking mechanisms. Warships found themselves drifting, powerless, as if the universe itself had turned against them. And then, Across every screen in the Threx homeworld, a message appeared. You believed we were weak because we were kind. You believed we were blind because we trusted. You believed we would not act because we were patient. You were wrong. Asterisk asterisk. For exactly 7 minutes, the entire Threx defense system remained disabled. Enough time to prove a point, but not enough to cause outright catastrophe. Then, just as suddenly as it had failed, it came back online. No demands were made. No follow-up transmissions. The humans had simply let them go. And that was perhaps the most terrifying part, because it meant that at any moment, they could do it again. The Council's desperation. By now, the remaining Council members were beyond desperate. Meetings that had once been filled with bureaucratic squabbles and long-winded diplomacy turned into frantic crisis summits. Ambassador Krill of the Proxim described those meetings best. It was the first time I had ever seen the most powerful species in the galaxy truly afraid. The question that haunted them all was the same. What does humanity want? Had they become conquerors in their silence? Did they desire vengeance, territory, power? But humanity had not made any demands. They had simply made their absence known, and that absence had done more damage than any war fleet ever could. The broadcast that changed everything. It was on the 60th day of the reckoning that humanity finally broke its silence. A single transmission was sent to every council world, every species, every leader. The video. It showed Earth, not its warships, not its armies, but its people. Children playing beneath open skies. Families laughing. Scientists crafting medicines that cured alien diseases. Soldiers helping rebuild alien worlds after past wars, despite everything. Then the screen faded to black, and a voice, calm, steady, unmistakably human, spoke. We were your allies, your friends. We were the ones who stood by you when you needed us most. And when we needed you, you betrayed us. We will not forget. But we will not become what you expected us to be. The video ended with a final message. The choice is yours now. We are watching. A new era begins. For the first time in its long and chaotic history, the Galactic Council formally apologized. They issued reparations. They removed all economic sanctions against Earth. They dismantled the oppressive policies that had once hindered human expansion. And most importantly, they never crossed humanity again. Back on Proxima Prime, Ambassador Krill finished his tale, looking at the wide-eyed younglings before him. You see, he said softly, humanity did not conquer through war. They conquered through consequences. A hush fell over the gathered students. And that, Krill said, standing tall, is why every species in this galaxy still tells stories about the day Deathworlders stopped being nice. The Deathworlder advantage. The legacy of fear and respect. It had been 5 cycles since the events of what historians would call the reckoning, the moment when humanity stopped pretending. 5 cycles since the Galactic Council, once an untouchable seat of power, was humbled without a single war fleet reaching Earth's borders. The galaxy had changed. No longer was humanity seen as a fragile species, too naive for the brutal realities of interstellar politics. No longer were they dismissed as optimistic primitives who simply lucked their way into space travel. No, they were something far worse. They were Deathworlders. A term that once carried an air of scientific classification now held a far darker meaning. Because Deathworlders weren't just survivors. They were apex predators that had been holding back all along. And now, for the first time, the galaxy was forced to reckon with the truth. Humanity had always been dangerous. They just chose to be kind. The silent expansion. Despite the fear they commanded, humanity did not immediately take advantage of their newfound dominance. They did not launch conquests. They did not colonize through force. They did not demand tributes from the council races who had once wronged them. Instead, they simply expanded. Quietly, methodically. No permission. No treaties. No debate. Humanity's star maps began shifting at an alarming rate. The Sol system remained Earth's throne, but new colonies spread into previously unclaimed space, high-gravity worlds, radiation-scorched wastelands, planets with toxic atmospheres that no other species had ever dared consider. And humans thrived there. Their first extreme environment colony, named Perseverance, was established on the volcanic hellscape of XR 319, a world with a molten crust and a constant bombardment of solar storms. Every other species had deemed it uninhabitable. Humans. They built cities beneath the shifting lava flows, created artificial ecosystems inside reinforced caverns, and even developed genetically enhanced crops that could grow in the planet's brutal conditions. When the Galactic Council heard of it, the shock was palpable. Because if humans could turn a Deathworld into a paradise, what else could they do? The genetics of a Deathworlder. It wasn't just their stubbornness. It wasn't just their strategy. It wasn't even their technology that made humans terrifying. It was them. Their biology. Their instincts. Their evolutionary advantages that no other species had. The Council's top scientists were the first to uncover what made them different. Pain tolerance. Humans could take injuries that would kill most species and keep fighting. Their bodies adapted to suffering, developed scar tissue, and even rebuilt damaged neural pathways with enough time. Endurance hunting. Most species relied on short bursts of energy. Humans. They could run their prey to exhaustion. Even in battle, they did not tire like other species. Rapid adaptation. Human immune systems could survive alien bacteria that wiped out other races. Their bodies could develop tolerances to extreme temperatures, radiation, and chemical exposure within a single generation. Pack mentality. While other species functioned in rigid hierarchies, humans had a flexible social structure that made them nearly impossible to divide. If you fought one, you fought them all. Even the most war-hardened races, like the Athraxi hegemony, had begun implementing new military doctrines after analyzing human resilience. Because if humanity could survive where others perished, then they weren't just another species. They were inevitable. The rise of human-alien coalitions. Not all species feared humanity. Some saw opportunity. The Proxim, ever the pragmatists, recognized that allying with Earth was the safest bet for the future. So, while the Council still whispered in fear, the Proxim sent a delegation to Earth, not with demands, not with apologies, but with an offer. They wanted to learn, to train alongside humanity, to understand what made Deathworlders different, and humanity accepted. For the first time, non-human soldiers were allowed into the infamous Terran Special Forces program, a training regime so grueling that even elite human warriors barely survived it. The first group of Proxim trainees entered the program with confidence. After the first day, half of them dropped out. After the first week, only 3 remained. By the end of the program, only 1 Proxim soldier had survived. Her name was Chijivala, and she would go on to become the first non-human to ever receive Terran combat honors. Her testimony, recorded and broadcast across the galaxy, would shake the very foundations of the known universe. I thought humans were strong. I was wrong. They are more than that. They are relentless, unyielding. I have seen them push beyond pain, beyond exhaustion, beyond what should be possible. I have seen them break, and instead of falling, they rise. Again, and again, and again. They do not fight for survival. They fight for each other. And that is why no one can defeat them. The Council's final plea. After witnessing humanity's growing influence, the Galactic Council knew they had one last chance to secure their future. They summoned Earth's leaders to a final diplomatic summit. Not to apologize, but to negotiate. Because despite all their fear, all their failures, they now understood a simple truth. Humanity did not need the Council. The Council, however, desperately needed humanity. Earth's response. The summit was held on Elder's Spire. the same neutral ground where humanity had once delivered their infamous warning. We are done being nice. But this time, when the Terran delegation arrived, they did not come with threats. They did not come with demands. They came with a single question. Why should we stay? The council chambers fell into stunned silence. Because it was not a question of power. Humanity already had that. It was a question of purpose. Would the galaxy prove that they had learned? Or would they force the Deathworlders to once again show why they should be feared? The alliance shifts. A universe on the edge. The halls of Elder's Spire had never felt so suffocating. The Grand Chamber, where the most powerful species of the galaxy once dictated the course of civilizations, was now filled with the one question that had turned the entire galactic order on its head. Why should we stay? Humanity did not ask it as a threat. They asked it as a challenge. For the first time in recorded history, a species was not begging for membership in the Galactic Council. They were contemplating leaving it behind entirely. And the rest of the universe knew that if Earth walked away, others would follow. The Fragmenting Council. Before the Reckoning, the Galactic Council had been a model of bureaucracy, slow, methodical, and utterly convinced of its own importance. But now it was a house of cards, barely holding itself together. The Vorkari Dominion was a husk of what it once was. The loss of human trade, infrastructure, and technology had left it crippled, its empire fracturing into warlord-led factions. The Athraxi hegemony had withdrawn from intergalactic politics entirely, refusing to acknowledge their failed strike against humanity that had ended with their fleets being found empty, silent, and powerless in the void. The Threx Coalition, once an economic powerhouse, had been forced to accept human-led technological advances just to avoid complete collapse. Even the Proxim, long known for their neutrality, had begun sending more and more emissaries to Earth, forming alliances outside of the Council's influence. In other words, the Council's power was crumbling. And now, humanity was asking whether it was even worth saving. A desperate proposal. It was Ambassador Jolkor of the Proxim who finally broke the suffocating silence. He stepped forward, his mandibles clicking nervously as he faced the Terran delegation, a group of human diplomats, military officers, and scientists who sat impassively, waiting for a reason to care. Honored Terrans, Jolkor began, his voice steady but urgent. You have every right to question our worth. We have failed you before, and we do not deserve your mercy. There was no protest to his words, because they were true. He continued, but I ask you this, not as a diplomat, but as a representative of every species that now fears a galaxy without you. A murmur spread through the chamber. Without humanity, Jolkor said, there will be no balance, no stability. You have already seen how your absence has unraveled our systems. You have already proven your value. The human delegation exchanged glances. They knew they had leverage, and not just in politics. The future of the entire galactic order now hinged on what they decided next. The hidden truth of the Deathworlders. While the Council floundered, Earth's greatest minds had already realized something critical. It wasn't just about the Council. It wasn't just about past betrayals or revenge. It was about a fundamental truth of the universe, one that only humans had truly mastered. Survival. Not just personal survival. Not just military dominance. Survival as a species. Because unlike most council members who had risen to power through slow, careful expansion, humanity had been forged in crisis after crisis. Plagues, natural disasters, wars, economic collapses. Earth had never known peace for long. And yet, instead of crumbling, humans adapted. They innovated. They evolved. No other species had been tested like that. No other species had developed a survival instinct so deeply ingrained into their culture, their very DNA. And that was what made humanity dangerous. Because where the Council saw diplomacy as control, humanity saw it as cooperation. Where the Council feared instability, Humanity embraced change. And now, for the first time, the galaxy needed that adaptability more than ever. A new alliance is forged. The final negotiations between Earth and the Council were unlike anything the Chamber had ever seen. For centuries, new species had fought desperately to earn a seat among the great powers. They had groveled, bartered, and sacrificed entire generations to gain even a fraction of the influence humanity now held. But humanity dictated the terms. And the new terms were simple. The Council would no longer dictate human expansion. Earth would colonize where it pleased, how it pleased. Trade restrictions were abolished. Human corporations, once subjected to heavy regulations, would now be free to operate across all known space. Military parity was acknowledged. The Council could no longer claim dominance over intergalactic defense, and human fleets were to be recognized as an independent, sovereign force. The Proxim, Threx, and Ithraxi were granted new seats of power. In a stunning move, Earth negotiated on behalf of other species that had once been overlooked, forcing the Council to share authority with those who had been treated as lesser races. It was, without question, the largest shift in interstellar politics in recorded history. And the final condition was the most shocking of all. Humanity would remain in the Council, but only as an observer. They would have no binding obligations to act on the Council's behalf. No forced military assistance, no political entanglements. They would watch. And if the Council ever failed again, they would act. On their own terms. The aftermath. A galaxy reborn. The weeks that followed the new alliance saw a transformation unlike anything the universe had witnessed before. Human-led engineering projects rebuilt shattered economies. Planets that had suffered under old, inefficient Council policies were now thriving under Earth's innovations. New military doctrines were established. For the first time, non-human species began adopting human battle tactics, embracing the Deathworlder way of persistence, adaptability, and endurance. Cultural exchange flourished. Proxim soldiers trained in Earth's elite combat schools. Threx researchers worked alongside human geneticists to develop biological advancements never thought possible. Ithraxi pilots flew in joint human-alien strike groups, breaking barriers that had lasted for centuries. In just a few short cycles, the galaxy was stronger, smarter, and more united than it had ever been. Not because of conquest, not because of threats, but because humanity had taught them what it meant to survive. Back on Earth, as the new alliance took shape, Earth itself was changing. The days of being the naive newcomers were gone. In their place stood a species that had been tested and had emerged stronger. A species that had stared into the abyss of betrayal and walked away wiser and more powerful than before. A species that now held the fate of the entire galaxy in its hands. And in a quiet chamber on Earth's lunar diplomatic station, one human leader watched the stars beyond the window and whispered to himself, "We were never weak. We just gave them a chance to be better. Now, let's see if they deserve it." Humanity's declaration. The moment that changed everything. The galaxy had seen many pivotal moments. The rise and fall of empires. The forging of alliances and the shattering of treaties. Entire civilizations had been born and lost over the course of eons. But none of those events carried the same weight as the moment humanity chose to speak again. For years, they had watched. Not as rulers, not as conquerors, but as judges. When the Council called, they did not always answer. When they did, their words were few, their actions calculated and deliberate. It was a terrifying power, to be the silent observer in a room full of fearful voices. And now, after years of silence, humanity had decided it was time. Time to declare their stance. Time to reshape the stars. Time to remind the galaxy exactly who they were. The Grand Assembly. A new order is born. The Grand Assembly of the Galactic Council was the largest interstellar gathering ever recorded. Representatives from over 700 civilizations, including species from beyond the known sectors, had arrived at Elder's Spire, the station where humanity's reckoning had first begun. There was no mistaking the stakes. This was not a diplomatic summit. This was a verdict. Would humanity continue to stand alongside the Council, or had the time come for them to walk away for good? The chamber was filled with hushed tension as the Terran delegation finally arrived. Unlike other representatives, the humans carried no ceremonial banners, no symbols of allegiance. They were simply there. And that alone was enough to silence the entire hall. The voice of a Deathworld, the human envoy, Ambassador Elias Voss, stepped forward. He was not a soldier, not a warlord, not a conqueror, just a man with words more powerful than any fleet. His voice was steady, but it carried the weight of every betrayal, every lesson, every moment of restraint. And when he spoke, the galaxy listened. "We have watched you." The chamber fell deathly quiet. "We have seen you struggle, adapt, and grow. We have seen old powers fall and new alliances rise. We have seen the fear in your eyes, the uncertainty in your hearts." He paused, letting the words settle. "We did not seek this power over you. We did not ask for your fear. But you gave it to us anyway." A ripple of unease spread through the chamber. "For generations, we extended our hands in peace, and when you betrayed that trust, we did not seek revenge. Instead, we let you suffer the weight of your own actions. We did not conquer. We did not destroy. We simply showed you what the universe looks like without us." Every species present knew the devastation that had followed humanity's withdrawal. Entire economies had collapsed. War had nearly broken out in the power vacuum left behind. And through it all, humanity had watched. "We are not your rulers. We are not your overlords. But we are the ones who have carried you further than you ever realized. And now, the time has come for you to make a choice." Silence. No one dared speak. Will you learn from your past? Will you choose strength over cowardice, unity over division? Or will we be forced to leave you behind? The last chance. No one wanted to imagine what would happen if humanity truly walked away. The Council, weakened by its past failures, could not survive another collapse. The Proxim, Threx, and Ithraxi had grown stronger through their alliances with Earth, but even they were not ready to stand alone. The old ways, the ways of manipulation, of treating humanity as a tool rather than an equal, had already failed. If they tried to return to them, they would not survive what came next. This was their last chance, and every species in that chamber knew it. The new Galactic Accord. For the first time in its long bureaucratic history, the Galactic Council did not hesitate. Humanity's conditions were not debated. They were accepted. A new accord was drafted, signed, and enacted in the span of a single day. From that moment forward, the Galactic Council was no longer a council of rulers. It was a council of equals. There would be no more forced alliances, no more manipulative diplomacy, no more exploiting the goodwill of others. The old ways had ended, and in their place, a new age had begun, a future forged by humanity. The years that followed were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. With humanity at its center, the new Galactic Accord became a force of true cooperation rather than empty politics. Trade routes reopened. Entire economies flourished under human-led technological advancements. Scientific alliances thrived. Diseases that had plagued civilizations for centuries were eradicated through joint human-alien research. Military strategies evolved. The Terran Special Forces, once feared, now trained soldiers from every species, teaching them the ways of endurance, adaptation, and persistence. And for the first time in history, war became rare. Because now, everyone understood what was at stake. Everyone understood who had carried them through their darkest hours. And most importantly, everyone understood that humanity had given them a chance to be better. A chance they would never waste again. Back on Earth, years had passed since the Declaration. The stars had changed. The balance of power had shifted. And yet, on the quiet surface of Earth, beneath the blue skies and the endless oceans, humanity remained the same. They still explored. They still dreamed. They still pushed forward, not for power, not for dominance, but because it was who they were. Because in the end, the greatest strength of a Deathworlder was not their ability to destroy. It was their ability to endure. And humanity had endured everything. Legends are born. The story that would never die. The galaxy had changed. Not through war, not through conquest, but through a single lesson that had been burned into the hearts of every species. The Deathworlders, the ones they had once dismissed as fragile optimists, had taught them what it meant to endure, not with fire, not with destruction, but with patience, with conviction, with the quiet power of knowing they could, but choosing not to. And that more than anything was what terrified the universe. Because the greatest threat was never the one that boasted of its power. It was the one that knew its power and waited. The unbreakable bond. Years had passed since the new Galactic Accord reshaped the balance of the universe. Humanity no longer stood as an outsider looking in. They were not conquerors. They were not rulers. But they were the foundation of everything that had come after. And in that time, something extraordinary had happened. The species that had once seen them as a threat began to change. They studied human endurance. They trained in human battle tactics. They adopted human methods of survival, of diplomacy, of cooperation. Because they understood now. The reason humanity was so dangerous was not because of their weapons. It was because of their mindset. Because when a Deathworlder decides to protect something, nothing in the universe can stop them. The final test and the birth of legends. But history, as always, had a way of repeating itself. Despite the peace, despite the alliances, despite the newfound strength of the Council, a new enemy was coming. An enemy unlike anything the galaxy had ever faced. Not an empire, not a rogue warlord, not another betrayal from within. Something far older, something far worse. The first signs were subtle, disruptions in deep space sensor networks, ghost signals that flickered and vanished before they could be analyzed. Then came the lost ships, vessels that entered uncharted sectors and never returned. At first, the Council assumed it was pirates, maybe a rogue faction testing the new order. But then the survivors began to appear, drifting in dead space, their minds shattered by something they could not describe. And all they could whisper before their bodies failed was a single word. The forgotten, the call for aid, and the answer that changed everything. The Council convened an emergency summit. Fear gripped every representative. The Athraxi, the Threx, the Vorkari remnants, even the once proud Proxim, all of them had faced war, but this was different. Because this enemy did not negotiate. It did not seek power. It did not want control. It only consumed. And in the face of such an enemy, there was only one species the galaxy could turn to. Not because of their strength, not because of their fleets, but because they had survived worse. And so, for the first time in centuries, the Council sent a message not of demands, not of diplomatic maneuvering, not of political strategy. A message of desperation. We need your help. And Earth's response was simple. We're already on our way. The march of Deathworlders. It began like a storm on the horizon. First, the Terran fleet moved, not as an army, but as a force of nature. Not to invade, not to conquer, but to stand between the void and those who could not fight it alone. The battle lines were drawn across the edges of known space. Humanity standing at the front. Behind them, the Council's finest warriors. The Athraxi, the Threx, the Proxim, all of them wearing the battle colors of Earth, trained in the ways of Deathworlders. And when the forgotten came, when the darkness finally revealed itself, the galaxy did not cower. It did not break, because it had learned the lesson humanity had spent centuries teaching. They would not fall. They would not bow. They would endure. The last stand at the edge of space, the battle that followed, would be spoken of for millennia. Not because of its brutality, not because of the desperation, the carnage, the horror of facing something beyond comprehension, but because for the first time in history, the galaxy fought together, not as separate species, not as divided nations, but as one force. And at the center of it all stood the Deathworlders, unyielding, unbreakable, the fire that refused to be extinguished. They fought, not because they had to, but because it was who they were. Because this was their home too. Because there were no more humans, no more Ithraxi, no more Proxim. There were only survivors. And when the battle was over, when the Forgotten had been driven back into the abyss, when the last human ship returned from the edge of existence itself, the galaxy finally understood a new name for humanity. After the war, the Council gathered once more, not to debate, not to negotiate, but to honor those who had stood when all others had fallen. And so, humanity was given a new title, a name that would be carved into history for all time. The Guardians of the Stars. Not because they ruled, not because they demanded it, but because they had earned it. Because when the galaxy had stood at the precipice of oblivion, it was humanity that had pulled it back. Not with fear, not with threats, but with resolve. The final whispered stories. Back on Proxima Prime, an elder storyteller sat with a group of younglings beneath the twin moons. The war was over. The galaxy had changed again. But still, some stories never faded. Tell us again, a young Proxim child asked, their bioluminescent skin flickering with excitement. Tell us the story of the humans. The elder smiled, his mandibles clicking softly. Oh, by the sacred moons, he whispered, his eyes reflecting the starlight. You want to know about the Deathworlders? The children nodded eagerly. You want to know about the day they stopped pretending? They leaned in, breathless. The elder chuckled, the weight of history in his voice. Then gather close, little ones, because this story will never end. The end.